Okay, so starting off today's show, I wanted to recap Game 6 of the series between the Houston Rockets and the Oklahoma City Thunder, as well as preview the Game 7 that will be going on between these two teams tonight in the Orlando bubble, and this will be the last game of the first round of the NBA playoffs. And a couple observations I had from Game 6 and a couple of things I want to talk about in anticipation for Game 7 of this series. And let's start here. Preseason, when the Rockets traded Chris Paul to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Russell Westbrook, it was a very interesting decision and one of the more intriguing trades of this just loaded NBA offseason, because the Rockets really sent a message there that they were going for it, and they really didn't think Chris Paul could be successful there, and they thought Russell Westbrook could help James Harden and the rest of that group win a championship more than Chris Paul could. You kind of look at Oklahoma City before the season started. I'm not going to lie. Last year, even with Russell Westbrook and Paul George, when you watched Oklahoma City, they never really looked right. They never really looked like a great team. And I kind of just thought they were going into rebuild mode. They got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and a bunch of picks back from the Los Angeles Clippers in that trade for Paul George. And even though Chris Paul and Danilo Gallinari are two very good players, along with Steven Adams, who was still there, and Dennis Schroeder, I just didn't really know if Paul and Gallinari, along with some of the veterans, were going to buy in and be competitive with a team that was playing in such a good Western Conference and a team that lost, really their two best players. But Oklahoma City, throughout the regular season, was really good, and Billy Donovan deserves a lot of credit for that. Chris Paul also deserves a lot of credit for that, and that's really why Billy Donovan was one of the finalists for NBA Coach of the Year. So Oklahoma City was one of the teams that actually really impressed me during the regular season. I did not expect them to even make the playoffs in the preseason, but when you watch them, they are just a very good basketball team. So I'm not surprised they're competitive at all in this series. But the thing is, before the series started, everyone kind of assumed that the Rockets were going to win. And it's interesting because during the gap between when the NBA season shut down to when the NBA bubble has restarted here in Orlando, there were a lot of people that have been saying that really the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Bucks are the only three teams that have a realistic shot to win the NBA championship. And I don't know if that statement right now is necessarily true, but a lot of people were saying if any team not those three could win, it would be the Houston Rockets, and they could be the bubble's possible sleeper team. And I'm not going to say I 1,000% agreed with that statement, but what I will say is I thought that statement would be at least possible, because Houston, especially after the first two games of the Oklahoma City series, they played really well. Their defense locked down Oklahoma City in Game 1. Game 2, that game was never close. Houston was the better team from start to finish in that game. You then look at Game 2, it was close down the stretch, and the Rockets' defense just took over, and they ended up winning that game. And there's someone that picked the Houston Rockets to lose in this series in 7 games before the series started. I'm not going to lie, after Game 2, I was feeling kind of nervous. And you would think that Houston, they're a veteran team, they're plenty of experience. They've made the playoffs before. You wouldn't think that they would, take Oklahoma City lightly, especially a team led by Chris Paul. They lose the next 2 games. They come back and counter very well in Game 5. And more importantly, this is when Russell Westbrook comes back. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Rockets were to lose this game tonight. And we're going to get to this at the end of the segment, but the Houston Rockets cannot lose this game tonight, because if they do, they may have to really start thinking about going in a different direction as a franchise, because they've had plenty of opportunities, especially in the last 3 years. And it's just going to be very interesting to see what ends up going down. But anyway, going back to Russell Westbrook, I think if he comes back tonight, well, he's back already, but he's going to play tonight, and if the Rockets lose, that would mean they would have lost 2 of the 3 games they had with Russell Westbrook. And it's crazy because they won Game 5. And I think right now, when you look at Game 6, the difference in that game was just the fact that in crunch time, Chris Paul wanted the ball more. We also saw in the Eastern Conference Series in Game 1 with Miami and Milwaukee that Jimmy Butler just wanted the ball more than Giannis. And we're going to get to the Eastern Conference at the back end of the show. I wanted to start off with the Western Conference today. But when we look at this Game 7, Houston should win. I think when you compare these two rosters, Houston is the more talented team. But if the game is close in crunch time, the first gut instinct for me is to think Oklahoma City is going to win just because of Chris Paul. And not only because of Chris Paul, I should say, it's that whole lineup. Oklahoma City, what I like about them so much is that in crunch time, they play the same lineup. It's Paul at the 1, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the young stud, at the 2, Dennis Schroeder at the 3, really. So they play, 3 point guards on the floor at the same time, 2 of them who are really experienced in Paul and Schroeder, and then a young gun in Shai Gilge. And then at the 4-5, you have Gallinari and Steven Adams. For modern-day basketball, I really like that lineup. And I think that lineup is going to give Oklahoma City a legitimate shot to win tonight's game. You then look at Houston. I mean, they're the more talented team, but James Harden has never shown you in the playoffs that he could get the job done in crunch time. When you look at the 2018 season, right, that was really Houston's, first real shot, and probably which will end up being their best shot, I think, to win an NBA championship in, the last 3 years. And the crazy thing about that was, before that year, James Harden kind of had a rep for being not a great playoff performer. If you remember, the year before that, this was 2017, they had a winner-go-home game against the San Antonio Spurs in San Antonio with their season on the line, and my guy just didn't show up, and San Antonio just blowed them out. I believe Kawhi Leonard wasn't even playing that game, if I'm correct. Then you look at the next year, Houston loses to Golden State, where Chris Paul, he gets hurt. I totally understand that, but at the same time, how many consecutive threes in a row did James Harden miss in that Game 7 at home? And not only James Harden, it was really the whole Rockets team. And then this is the one most people forget about. If you remember in Game 6 of that series, this was the first game that Chris Paul missed. If you remember in Game 6 of that series, the Rockets in the first half played phenomenal. They were up by like 20. And then Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Kevin Durant just went absolutely bonkers. And the Warriors ended up winning that game and then the series. So Houston blew an opportunity there. And then we can't forget about last year when the Houston Rockets, they were down 3-1, but they had Golden State at home without Kevin Durant. He was hurt, and they still, at home, could not get the job done as Steph Curry just went absolutely off in the second half. And the crazy thing about Game 6 of this series was that as bad as Harden and Westbrook were playing the whole game, the Rockets actually had a shot to win. And by a shot, I mean a legitimate shot. They were up 98-92 with about 3 minutes to play. And if you didn't think that by that point the Rockets were probably going to win, I give you a lot of credit, because I sure as hell thought Houston had the game wrapped up then. And then all of a sudden, Chris Paul just tells the rest of his teammates, I'm not ready to go home, drops a couple of just ice cold, heartbreaking threes if you're a Rocket fan. And Oklahoma City, the game was tied at 98. The game was tied at 100. The Thunder ended up taking the lead. Russell Westbrook ended up turning the ball over, and Oklahoma City ended up winning, getting to fighting to face another day, and we are going to have our second winner-go-home Game 7. The other problem I have here is this. A lot of people have asked me, who would you blame for the Rockets' loss? And I think there are 3 obvious candidates. There's James Harden, there's Mike D'Antoni, and there's Russell Westbrook. Those are the 3 obvious candidates. And for me, the first name that's going to come to mind is James Harden. Just because he's the leader of the team, he's been in so many of these situations before, and year after year, he fails to get the job done. And I totally understand that a lot of people, are going to say, Zach, they had a 6-point lead, and, he's James Harden, and I get it. But at the same time, Chris Paul clearly was the better player in crunch time. And with the beef, and I say what you want, there's clearly, those two clearly are not on the same page. And for Chris Paul to just, after the game, or as the game was ending, Oklahoma City was at the free throw line, for Chris Paul to just look straight into the eyes of James Harden and just give him that look that says, we're not going home, good try. That is why I missed basketball so much. The little storylines like that, it's crazy. And even though the Rockets should really win tonight because, yeah, they're the more talented team, I think we could all agree that they could give the Lakers a little bit more problems than Oklahoma City would, even though I'm not ready to count Oklahoma City out. I think the whole league has, cut them short the whole season. If you watch Oklahoma City from December to now, they have been one of the 10 best teams in the NBA the whole season. So I'm really not surprised Oklahoma City has taken this series to 7. But anyway, Chris Paul just says, I'm not going home. And to give you guys my official pick on this Game 7, I'm going to take the Houston Rockets to win. And I may regret it. I totally understand it. And I love Oklahoma City. And I really think this is going to be a coin flip game. But the reason why I'm going to pick the Houston Rockets to win this Game 7, and maybe I just end up looking like a fool, is because it's just too important. At least the last 2 years, as devastating as the Rockets' playoff losses have been, right? At least in the last 2 years, you could say to yourself, okay, at least it was to the Warriors. We know how good the Golden State Warriors have been over the last 3 years. They were literally a dynasty. And even though the Rockets easily could have won either of those 2 games, you could have definitely made the argument that, those 2 losses were as bad as it gets for the franchise. But when you look at it this year, as much as I love the Oklahoma City Thunder, there is no reason why the Rockets should lose in the first round of the series. They built their team to potentially take a shot at the Lakers. I think that's why Daryl Morey kind of built his team in this small ball way, is because he kind of thought to himself, all right, the only way we could beat the Lakers is if we just get ridiculously hot from 3, and our best way to do that is by playing a small ball lineup. If you're going to make a statement like that and build your team like that, you have to at least give yourself a chance and beat the Lakers and go up against the Lakers. If they build their team and don't even end up facing the Lakers, that would just really go down in being a bad decision, when it's looked at in the future. And the thing is, if the Rockets do end up losing this game, it's going to be very interesting to see where they go from here. Because you guys saw a couple of days ago, the Indiana Pacers fired their head coach, Nate McMillan. A lot of people didn't really understand that. Usually, I'm pro-coach in these situations, but what I'll say is this. If I were Indiana, would I have fired Nate McMillan? Probably not. He's definitely one of the 30 best coaches in the world. He deserves to be an NBA head coach. There's no doubt about that. But Indiana has not made it out of the first round of the playoffs in the last 4 years. And I'm not saying that's why he got fired, but the fact that they've gotten swept the last 2 years, I think when you ask, okay, why did Indiana fire Nate McMillan? That right there could be the main reason why. Did I expect them to beat the Miami Heat? No. But there's no reason why they should have gotten swept and why they really just weren't that competitive in that series. So I've heard if Houston lets D'Antoni go, then he could possibly go to Indiana. And if that was the case, I don't know what Houston does because they're not trading James Harden. Say what you want, James Harden is untouchable. He's going to be a Rocket for the near future. So the next question is this. Is what other coach could play with James Harden, and would he adapt to that style of basketball? If you're the Houston Rockets, if you win this game tonight, you avoid all of these questions for the near future. But if you lose this game tonight, those questions are going to come at you fast and quickly, and you really want to avoid that. So my official pick for the series is the Rockets in 7, or for the game tonight, is the Rockets in 7, but the Rockets really better be careful because if the game is close down the stretch, I trust Oklahoma City more to get the job done, and if the Houston Rockets do lose tonight, I'm really not sure where exactly they go from here. Okay, moving on to the other series in the Western Conference that actually ended last night, and in Game 7, the Denver Nuggets ended up eliminating the Utah Jazz and beating them by a final score of 80-78, and there are a couple things that I want to talk about in this series. First off, the fact that Denver was down 3-1 and ended up coming back to win the series is super impressive. Jamal Murray really obviously came onto the scene. This was the best stretch of basketball I've ever seen him play. And Jamal, I've always been a fan of him since his Kentucky days. He played with Tyler Ulis on that 2016 team. So I've always been a huge fan of Jamal Murray, and he really showed up and balled out in these playoffs. But anyway, the fact that he led Denver to coming back from a 3-1 deficit and winning, super impressive. Awesome job by him. He only had 17 points last night, but he still was a main reason why, one of the main reasons why Denver ended up winning that series. How about Nikola Jokic last night? As good as Jamal Murray was throughout this whole series, and if you were going to pick like a series MVP for the Denver Nuggets, it would have been Jamal Murray. But last night, Nikola Jokic was the Denver Nuggets' best player, and he really came to play. He made so many big baskets down the stretch. If you watched this game, it was interesting. So Denver was up 5 at the end of the first quarter. They outscored Utah by 9 in the second quarter, meaning they're up by 14 at halftime. Utah cuts the deficit to 5 after 3, and really the fourth quarter was just punch after punch. It was, close game the whole way, lead change after lead change, and Nikola Jokic ended up making enough plays down the stretch for the Denver Nuggets to end up getting the victory. But here's the other crazy thing in this game that I want to talk about. How about the fact that just the way the game ended in general, if you didn't see it, so Denver is up by 2 with like 15 seconds left. Utah has the ball. Donovan Mitchell gets the ball stolen from him, I believe it was. Denver gets the steal, and they're coming down the floor in transition with like 8 seconds left, and they're driving, they're pushing the ball down the floor. When I'm screaming at my TV, hold the ball, let them foul you. You're up by 2. You're NBA players, you just make your free throws and get out of here. There's no such thing as a 4-point shot in the NBA right now. And it's interesting because it's almost like in baseball, right? A lot of times when you have a line drive coming at you and you're in the infield and you could turn a double play, your natural instinct isn't to let the ball drop, even though it may have been the best thing for the team. It's kind of the same thing here. When you steal the ball and you think you can make a layup, it's almost like in a video game where it's almost automatic to make a layup. Torrey Craig probably just thought, all right, all I have to do is make this layup and the series is over. You have the ball, you're in transition, whatever. And instead, he goes for the layup, he misses, and Utah grabs the rebound. And they're running down the floor, and really the whole time I'm thinking, wow, Utah's actually going to win this game. And that's going to be a gaffe that's remembered in Denver for the next 50 years, for history, if Utah would have ended up winning this game. And if you watch what happened, Mike Conley, he's dribbling the ball as fast as he could. He got a great look, and it rimmed around, and the Denver Nuggets ended up winning this game by a final score of 80-78. Look, I congratulate the Nuggets. I love the 1-2 punch of Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. I think Michael Porter is going to be a player. He had like a 3-minute stretch where clearly he was the best player on the floor last night, but obviously you're going to want to see him get on the court in crunch time, big minutes, a little more consistently, but 10 points in 17 minutes last night is a good start. Denver closed with very interestingly enough, with a lineup of Jamal Murray at the 1, Gary Harris, who I don't think it's a coincidence that Denver just all of a sudden started winning and started coming back in this series when Gary Harris came back. PJ Dozier, I just don't think was really getting the job done enough. And when you look at Denver, their closing lineup, Murray, Harris, Jeremy Grant was on the floor, Jokic was on the floor, and Torrey Craig was on the floor. So they were playing Torrey Craig at the 3, Jeremy Grant at the 4, Jokic at the 5, and that lineup ended up getting the job done. You get Utah. Obviously, it's super disappointing that they were up 3-1 and ended up losing this series. But I think in the big picture, when you look back at this Jazz season, the fact that they pushed Denver to 7 games without Bogdanovich, I think is a win, especially when you consider how badly things could have gone. You remember when Rudy Gobert blew up, the coronavirus and everything went down with him. You really thought that Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert and the future of this Jazz franchise may be in jeopardy, but everyone is, seemed to forget about that now. Donovan and Rudy, they seem fine. Their chemistry seems fine. Mike Conley played well. Joe Ingles was disappointing in the series, only 7 points in 39 minutes last night, 1 of 5 from 3, 3 of 10 from the field. I think Royce O'Neal could be a player. He's a really good defender. Clarkson played well last night. The fact that he was Utah's leading scorer at halftime of the game last night was a big problem, and it was good to see Donovan Mitchell in the second half of this game just really, see that his number was being called and step up, and he was just devastated after the game. He was just lying on the floor there for about, a couple seconds just after that Mike Conley shot rimmed out. He was devastated, and it was cool to see Jamal Murray show some nice sportsmanship. But the bottom line is, as entertaining as the series was, I have a hard time believing the Nuggets could beat the Clippers. We'll see what happens. We'll see if Jokic and Jamal Murray could rise to the occasion against Kawhi, Paul George, and that bunch. And look, I was the one who said on this podcast last week, the Clippers right now, when you watch them, they don't really look like they're that good of a basketball team. But at the same time, I probably would have taken Dallas to beat either Denver or Utah in a 7-game series if they were to play right now. And I don't know. I just think the Clippers are going to have an easier time with Denver than they did with Dallas. But I'll be posting my official Western Conference semifinal predictions tomorrow once we know who the winner of Oklahoma City and Houston is and who will be playing the Lakers. So really fun first segment here, breaking down the Western Conference playoffs with you guys. And we'll be moving on.